Please pick up, please," Esther whispered desperately as the phone rang, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely hold the device. At her feet, a blonde little girl, no more than 5 years old, lay unconscious on the dark Brooklyn sidewalk, wearing a small pink dress now torn and dirty. The voice that answered was tired, professional. "Burton speaking." "Mr. Burton? My name is Esther and I found a little girl. She has your business card and she's unconscious and I don't know what to do." The words tumbled out in desperation. There was a sharp silence, then a sharp intake of breath. A little girl? Blonde hair? Pink dress? "Yes, she's breathing but won't wake up and she's so cold. Where are you? Tell me exactly where you are." The man's voice had completely changed, from businesslike to desperate, from controlled to broken. As Esther gave the coordinates, she had no idea she was speaking to Craig Burton, a millionaire CEO who had been frantically searching for his only daughter, Sharon, for 3 hours. And she couldn't imagine that this phone call would change not just one life, but 4. Because sometimes fate puts people in our path at the exact moment we need each other most, and what began as a night of terror for 2 single parents would become the most beautiful love story and family they could never have imagined. But first, Sharon had to wake up. This is the story of how a desperate encounter in the darkness became the light that united 2 broken hearts and 2 children who needed a complete family. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. The bitter October wind cut through Esther Norbert's thin jacket as she hurried down the dimly lit streets of Brooklyn. Her blonde hair, once neatly pulled back for her shift, now escaped its ponytail in wisps around her tired face. At 28, she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders and tonight felt heavier than most. The restaurant had been particularly brutal, demanding customers, a broken coffee machine, and tips that barely covered her subway fare home. Her worn sneakers clicked against the wet pavement as she checked her phone for the 3rd time. 9:47 p.m. Dolores would be wondering where she was. Lucas would be asleep by now, curled up on the neighbor's couch with his favorite stuffed bear, waiting for Mommy to carry him home to their tiny 1-bedroom apartment. Esther's stomach growled, reminding her she'd skipped dinner again. The leftover sandwich from lunch sat untouched in her purse. She'd give it to Lucas for breakfast tomorrow. That's what mothers did. They went without, so their children could have more. As she turned onto the quieter residential street that led to the subway station, something made her pause. A soft whimpering sound drifted from the shadows near an overflowing dumpster. Her first instinct was to keep walking. This wasn't the safest neighborhood, especially not at this hour. But the sound came again, weaker this time, almost childlike. "Hello?" Esther called softly, her heart beginning to race. "Is someone there?" She pulled out her phone's flashlight, the weak beam cutting through the darkness. What she saw made her blood run cold. A small figure lay crumpled against the brick wall of an apartment building. A little girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old, wearing a once beautiful pink dress now torn and dirty. Her blonde hair was matted and her tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths. "Oh my God," Esther whispered, rushing forward and dropping to her knees beside the child. "Baby, can you hear me? Sweetheart, wake up." The little girl's skin was pale and cold to the touch. Esther's hands shook as she gently checked for injuries, her mind racing through every first aid lesson she'd ever learned. No visible cuts or bruises, but the child was clearly dehydrated and exhausted. "Come on, honey, open your eyes for me," Esther murmured, gently patting the girl's cheek. "You're safe now. I'm here." She frantically searched the child's pockets, hoping to find some form of identification. In the small pocket of the pink dress, her fingers closed around a business card. She pulled it out, holding it under her phone's light. Craig Burton, CEO, Burton Tech Solutions, was embossed in elegant silver lettering, along with a phone number. Esther's hands trembled as she dialed the number. This could be anyone, an uncle, a family friend, maybe even a stranger. But she had to try. The phone rang once, twice. "Burton speaking." A deep, tired voice answered on the third ring. Mr. Burton, my name is Esther Norbert, and I found a little girl. She has your card and she's unconscious, and I don't know what to do. The words tumbled out in a rush. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. A little girl? Blonde hair, pink dress? Yes, that's her. She's breathing, but she won't wake up, and she's so cold, and... Where are you? The voice was suddenly urgent, desperate. Tell me exactly where you are. Esther looked around frantically. I'm on Maple Street in Brooklyn, near the corner of Fifth Avenue, by the old brick apartment building with the green fire escape. Don't move. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming right now. Is she okay? Is she hurt? The pain in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just any man with a business card. This was her father. She's breathing, but she's very weak. I think she might be dehydrated. Should I call an ambulance? Yes, call 911, but please don't leave her. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Her name is Sharon. Sharon Burton. She's my daughter. The line went dead, and Esther immediately dialed emergency services while keeping one hand on the little girl's forehead. As she spoke to the dispatcher, the child stirred slightly, letting out a small moan. Sharon? Sharon, honey, can you hear me? Esther's voice was gentle but urgent. Your daddy is coming, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay. The little girl's eyelids fluttered, and for a moment her blue eyes focused on Esther's face. Mama, she whispered so quietly Esther almost missed it. Esther's heart broke. No, baby, I'm not your mama, but I'm here with you and your daddy is coming. You're safe now. Sharon's eyes closed again, but her breathing seemed a little stronger. Esther shrugged out of her thin jacket and wrapped it around the child, pulling her gently into her lap. She began humming softly, the same lullaby she sang to Lucas when he had nightmares. 14 minutes later, a black town car screeched to a halt at the curb. A tall man in an expensive suit burst from the passenger side, his dark hair disheveled, his face etched with panic and relief. Craig Burton was not what Esther had expected. Despite his obvious wealth, the designer suit, the chauffeur-driven car, the gold watch catching streetlight, his eyes held the same exhausted desperation she saw in her own mirror every morning. This was a father who loved his child more than anything in the world. Sharon! He dropped to his knees beside them, his hands shaking as he reached for his daughter. Oh, thank God. Sharon, Daddy's here. The little girl's eyes opened at the sound of his voice. Daddy? Her voice was barely a whisper. Yes, baby girl, I'm here. You're safe now. Craig's voice cracked as he gathered his daughter in his arms, and Esther saw tears streaming down his face. The ambulance arrived moments later, its red and blue lights painting the street in urgent colors. As the paramedics took over Sharon's care, Craig turned to Esther, seeing her clearly for the first time. She was younger than he'd expected, probably close to his age, with kind green eyes and blonde hair that caught the emergency lights. Her clothes were simple, a server's uniform from some restaurant, and she was shivering in the cold without her jacket, which was still wrapped around Sharon. You saved her, he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Esther replied, watching as the paramedics carefully lifted Sharon onto a small stretcher. Any mother would have done the same thing. Craig studied her face in the flashing lights. There was something in her voice when she said mother, a fierce protectiveness he recognized in himself. Are you coming to the hospital? One of the paramedics called. We're taking her to Brooklyn Methodist. Yes, of course, Craig answered immediately, then turned to Esther. Could you come with us? She seems to respond to your voice. Esther hesitated. She needed to get home to Lucas, and hospitals meant paperwork and questions she might not want to answer. But as she looked at Sharon's pale face on the stretcher, she found herself nodding. Okay, just to make sure she's all right. The ambulance ride was tense but hopeful. Sharon remained conscious, her small hand gripping Esther's fingers while Craig held her other hand. The child's eyes kept moving between her father and the kind stranger who had found her. as if trying to make sense of this new person in her world. "How did you know she was missing?" Esther asked quietly as the ambulance navigated through traffic. Craig's jaw tightened. "Her babysitter called me at 7. Sharon was playing in the building's courtyard while she prepared dinner. When she went to check on her 15 minutes later, she was gone." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I've been driving around Brooklyn for hours calling her name." "But how did she end up so far from Manhattan?" "I don't know," Craig admitted, stroking Sharon's hair. "She's never wandered off before. She's usually such a careful little girl." At Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, the emergency room buzzed with typical Friday night chaos, but Sharon's case was handled quickly and efficiently. Craig's name seemed to open doors. Within minutes, she was in a private room with the hospital's best pediatrician examining her. Dr. Martinez was thorough but gentle, checking Sharon's vital signs, blood pressure, and hydration levels, while she clung to both Craig and Esther's hands. "She's dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise unharmed," the doctor announced after completing his examination. "We'll get her on an IV to restore her fluids, and I'd like to keep her overnight for observation, but she should be fine." Craig's relief was palpable. He sank into the chair beside Sharon's hospital bed, his head in his hands. I thought I'd lost her." Esther had been quietly standing by the window, planning to slip away now that she knew Sharon was safe. But something in Craig's voice made her pause. "Mr. Burton," she said gently, "maybe you should tell her what happened. Children are stronger than we think, and she might need to talk about it." Craig looked up at her, surprised by the insight from this woman he'd just met. He turned to his daughter, who was looking much better now with color returning to her cheeks. "Sharon, sweetheart, can you tell Daddy why you left the courtyard today?" Sharon's blue eyes filled with tears. Miss Jennifer was talking on the phone. She said taking care of spoiled rich kids was hard work and she wanted to go home." Craig's face hardened. "She said that? I thought she didn't like me, Daddy. I thought maybe if I went away she'd be happier. But then I got lost and I walked and I was so tired." Sharon's voice trailed off as she began to cry. Esther felt her heart break for this little girl who had felt so unwanted that she'd run away. Without thinking, she moved to the other side of the bed and gently took Sharon's hand. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly. "Sometimes grown-ups say things when they're having a bad day, but that doesn't mean they don't care about you. Your daddy loves you so much. He spent all night looking for you." "Really?" Sharon looked between Esther and her father. "Really?" Craig confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "Sharon, you are the most important thing in my whole world. I don't know what I would do without you." Sharon smiled through her tears, then looked at Esther with curious eyes. "Are you a mommy too?" Esther felt her breath catch. "Yes, I am. I have a little boy named Lucas. He's 7 years old." "Where is he now?" "He's at home with our neighbor, probably wondering where Mommy is." Craig suddenly realized what Esther had sacrificed to help them. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. You have your own child to get home to, and here I am keeping you at the hospital all night." "It's okay," Esther said quickly. "I wanted to make sure Sharon was all right." "No, it's not okay." Craig stood up, reaching for his wallet. "Please, let me pay for a taxi home, or better yet, let my driver take you." Esther stiffened slightly. "That's not necessary. I can take the subway." "At midnight, in Brooklyn?" Craig shook his head. "Please, it's the least I can do." There was something in his tone, not condescending or pitying, but genuinely concerned, that made Esther reconsider. She was exhausted, and the thought of waiting for the late-night subway was daunting. "Okay," she agreed quietly. "Thank you." Craig spoke briefly with his driver on the phone, then returned to Sharon's bedside. The little girl was fighting sleep, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Will the nice lady come visit me?" Sharon asked drowsily. Esther and Craig exchanged glances. "If your daddy says it's okay, maybe I can come see how you're feeling in a few days." "I'd like that," Craig said, and he meant it. There was something about this woman, her gentleness with Sharon, her quiet strength, the way she'd stayed to help without expecting anything in return. Actually, could I get your phone number? I'd like to call and thank you properly when this is all over. Esther hesitated for a moment, then rattled off her number. Craig programmed it into his phone, saving it under Esther Angel. The driver arrived 20 minutes later, a kind-looking older man named Robert who treated Esther with the same respect he'd show his employer. As the town car glided through the quiet Brooklyn streets toward her apartment, Esther found herself staring out the window replaying the evening's events. What were the odds? Of all the streets in Brooklyn, of all the people who could have walked by, Sharon had ended up in front of her. And now she was sitting in a car that cost more than she made in 2 years, having just spent 3 hours with a man whose business card suggested he was worth millions. The car stopped in front of her building, a run-down brownstone divided into tiny apartments. The contrast wasn't lost on either Esther or Robert, but the driver simply said, "Have a good evening, miss," and waited until she was safely inside before driving away. Esther climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, her legs heavy with exhaustion. She knocked softly on Mrs. Rodriguez's door, and the elderly woman answered immediately. "Esther, where have you been? I was worried sick." "I'm so sorry, Dolores. There was an emergency. I had to help someone." Esther looked toward the couch where Lucas was sleeping peacefully, his dark hair falling across his forehead. Was he okay? He was an angel, as always. Had his dinner, did his homework, and fell asleep watching cartoons. But Esther, you look exhausted. What happened? Esther gave her neighbor a brief version of events as she gently lifted Lucas into her arms. The 7-year-old stirred but didn't wake, instinctively wrapping his arms around his mother's neck. A CEO, Mrs. Rodriguez raised her eyebrows. "Well, that's something. Did he seem like a good man?" "Yes," Esther said without hesitation. "He loves his daughter very much." Back in her own apartment, Esther laid Lucas on his bed and tucked him in, kissing his forehead softly. In the bathroom mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her hair was a mess, her uniform wrinkled and dirty from kneeling on the street, and there were tired lines around her eyes she hadn't noticed before. But as she changed into her pajamas and finally climbed into bed at nearly 2 in the morning, Esther found herself unable to sleep. She kept thinking about Sharon's small hand in hers, Craig's desperate relief when he found his daughter safe, and the way he'd looked at her. Not with pity or condescension, but with genuine gratitude and something that might have been respect. Meanwhile, across the city in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Craig Burton was having his own sleepless night. Sharon was safely tucked into her own bed, with a new babysitter sleeping in the guest room, one carefully vetted and recommended by the hospital's social worker. Craig stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the woman who had saved his daughter, Esther Norbit. Even her name was beautiful. There had been something about her, a quiet strength, a natural maternal instinct, and most surprisingly, a complete lack of interest in his wealth or status. When he'd offered to pay for her taxi, she'd hesitated not out of false modesty, but because she genuinely didn't want to take anything from him. How long had it been since someone had treated him like just a father, just a man, rather than a walking dollar sign? He picked up his phone, looking at her contact information. It would be inappropriate to call now. It was nearly 2:30 and she probably had to work tomorrow. But maybe in the afternoon, just to check on her, to thank her again. The next day dawned gray and drizzly. Esther woke up after only 4 hours of sleep to the sound of Lucas bouncing on her bed. Mommy, wake up. Mrs. Rodriguez made pancakes." Esther groaned and pulled a pillow over her head. "5 more minutes, baby." "But she said you helped a little girl last night. Was she hurt? Did you save her?" That got Esther's attention. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and saw Lucas's eager face. At 7, he was fascinated by stories of heroism and adventure. "I found a little girl who was lost and scared, so I helped her find her daddy," Esther explained simply. "Like a superhero?" Esther smiled despite her exhaustion. "More like what any good person would do." After a quick breakfast with Mrs. Rodriguez, who insisted on hearing every detail of the previous night's adventure, Esther walked Lucas to school. The October morning was crisp, and she found herself wondering how Sharon was feeling, whether she'd slept well, if she was eating breakfast. Around noon, as she was getting ready for her afternoon shift at the restaurant, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Hello? Esther, this is Craig Burton. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Her heart skipped a beat. Oh no, not at all. How is Sharon? Is she feeling better? She's much better, thank you. The doctor released her this morning and she's been asking about you all day. She wanted to know when the nice lady who found me was coming to visit. Esther smiled. She's a sweet little girl. I'm glad she's okay. She is, thanks to you. Craig paused, and Esther could hear voices in the background, probably his office. I was wondering, and please feel free to say no if this is too forward, but would you and your son like to join Sharon and me for a picnic in Central Park tomorrow? It's supposed to be a beautiful day, and I thought the kids might enjoy meeting each other. Esther's first instinct was to decline. This felt too much like charity, like pity from a wealthy man toward a struggling single mother. But then she thought about Lucas, who had so few opportunities for fun activities, and Sharon, who had seemed so lonely despite all her father's wealth. That sounds lovely, she heard herself saying. What time? How about noon? We could meet at the playground near the mall. We'll be there. After hanging up, Esther stared at her phone in disbelief. Had she really just agreed to a play date with a millionaire CEO and his daughter? What would they talk about? What would Lucas think of Central Park's fancy playground after the broken-down equipment at his local park? But Saturday morning brought sunshine, and Lucas's infectious excitement about meeting the lost girl and her daddy. Esther dressed carefully in her best jeans and a soft blue sweater, while Lucas wore his favorite shirt, a superhero design that was slightly too small, but he refused to give up. Central Park was bustling with families enjoying the beautiful fall weather. The playground near the mall was everything Esther had expected: pristine equipment, manicured lawns, and well-dressed children supervised by nannies or stay-at-home parents. She spotted Craig immediately. He was sitting on a bench wearing dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Esther's rent, but he looked more relaxed than he had in the hospital. Beside him, Sharon was swinging her legs impatiently, wearing a purple dress and watching every approaching person hopefully. There's the nice lady, Sharon announced loudly when she spotted them, jumping off the bench and running toward them. Sharon, remember what we talked about, Craig called, but he was smiling as he followed his daughter. Hi, Esther. Hi, Lucas. Sharon stopped just short of hugging Esther, clearly having been coached on appropriate behavior with new people. Hi, Sharon, Esther replied warmly. You look much better today. This is my son, Lucas. Lucas, usually shy with new people, stepped forward with unusual confidence. Are you the lost girl my mom found? I wasn't lost, Sharon said indignantly. I was exploring, but then I got tired and scared. That's okay, Lucas said matter-of-factly. I got lost at the mall once. It's scary. And just like that, the ice was broken. Within 5 minutes, the two children were racing toward the playground equipment, chattering about favorite games and comparing notes on school, cartoons, and ice cream flavors. Craig and Esther followed more slowly, settling on a bench where they could keep an eye on the kids. She's been talking about you constantly, Craig said, watching Sharon show Lucas how to properly navigate the climbing structure. Yesterday she asked if you could be her mommy. Esther felt her cheeks warm. I'm sorry. I hope that wasn't awkward. Are you kidding? It was the first time in years I've seen her connect with someone so quickly. Craig turned to study Esther's face. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Are you married? Lucas's father? It's just us, Esther said simply. It's been just us since Lucas was 2. Craig nodded, understanding. Sharon's mother died when she was barely 1. Car accident. I'm so sorry. It's been hard, doing it alone. I have nannies and housekeepers, all the help money can buy, but Sharon needs... He gestured toward the playground where his daughter was laughing at something Lucas had said. She needs what she's getting right now. Joy, friendship, someone who sees her as just a kid, not the heir to a fortune. They watched the children play in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Sharon was teaching Lucas a clapping game, and he was struggling to keep up with the rhythm, but both kids were giggling. "What do you do for work?" Craig asked eventually. "I'm a server. 2 different restaurants, lunch shift at Milano's in Brooklyn, dinner shift at the Garden on weekends." "That must be exhausting." Esther shrugged. "It pays the bills, mostly." Craig wanted to ask more, about her dreams, her struggles, whether she was happy, but something in her posture suggested she wasn't comfortable discussing her financial situation. Instead, he said, "Lucas seems like a great kid. You're doing an amazing job with him." "Thank you," Esther said quietly. "He's my whole world." "I understand that completely." Their conversation was interrupted by the children running back, faces flushed and eyes bright with excitement. "Daddy, can Lucas come see our house?" Sharon asked breathlessly. "I want to show him my room and my toys and my books." Craig looked at Esther questioningly. "Would that be okay? I could have Robert drive you home afterward." Esther hesitated. Lucas was practically vibrating with excitement beside her, and Sharon was bouncing on her toes hopefully. How could she explain that she was nervous about her son seeing the vast difference in their living situations? That she worried he might come home dissatisfied with their tiny apartment and second-hand everything? "Please, Mom." Lucas added his voice to Sharon's pleading. "I promise I'll be good." "Okay," Esther agreed, and both children cheered. The Burton penthouse was everything Esther had expected and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline. The furniture was modern and expensive, the kind she'd only seen in magazines. Original artwork hung on the walls, and everything was perfectly arranged and spotlessly clean. But what struck her most was how cold it felt. Despite the luxury, there were no family photos displayed, no children's drawings stuck to the refrigerator, no toys scattered around the living room. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel like a home where a child lived. Lucas, however, was too amazed to notice the lack of warmth. "Wow," he breathed, running to the windows. "You can see everything from here." Sharon took his hand and began the grand tour. "Come see my room. I have my own bathroom and everything." As the children disappeared down a long hallway, Craig turned to Esther apologetically. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, tea, water?" "Water would be nice, thank you." Craig led her to the kitchen, all marble countertops and stainless steel appliances, and poured her a glass of water from a built-in filtration system. "I know it's a lot," he said, gesturing around the apartment. "Sometimes I think it's too much for one man and a little girl." "It's beautiful," Esther said diplomatically. "But..." She looked at him, surprised by his perceptiveness. "It doesn't have to be beautiful to be a home." Craig leaned against the counter, studying her face. "What makes a place feel like home to you?" Esther considered the question seriously. "Laughter, pictures of people you love, evidence that life happens there, dishes in the sink, books left open, toys in corners, the smell of dinner cooking, voices calling out 'I'm home' when someone walks through the door." "This place has none of that," Craig said quietly. "It could," Esther replied gently. They were interrupted by shrieks of laughter from Sharon's room. Following the sound, they found the children engaged in an elaborate game that seemed to involve Sharon's entire collection of stuffed animals and Lucas's vivid imagination. "We're saving the kingdom from the dragon," Lucas explained seriously, holding up a purple unicorn. "Sharon is the princess and I'm the brave knight and Mr. Teddy is the wise wizard." "What's my role?" Craig asked, settling on the floor beside them. "You're the king," Sharon announced. "And Esther is the queen." Esther felt her cheeks flush, but Craig didn't seem fazed by his daughter's declaration. "Well then, Your Majesty," he said with a formal bow toward Esther. "What are your orders?" What followed was one of the most magical afternoons of both children's lives. They battled imaginary dragons, built elaborate castles out of Sharon's building blocks, and put on a puppet show using her collection of hand puppets. Craig and Esther found themselves drawn into the play, their adult worries momentarily forgotten as they followed the children's lead. During a break in the action, while the kids were in the kitchen getting juice boxes, Craig turned to Esther with wonder in his eyes. "I haven't heard Sharon laugh like this since." He paused, thinking. "I honestly can't remember the last time." "Lucas is the same way," Esther admitted. "He's usually quiet around new people, but Sharon brings out his silly side." "They're good for each other." "Yes, they are." Their eyes met and held for a moment, and Esther felt something shift between them. A recognition, a possibility she wasn't ready to name. The spell was broken when the children returned, sticky-fingered and chattering about their next adventure. But the feeling lingered, a warm awareness that hummed beneath their casual conversation for the rest of the afternoon. As evening approached, Esther reluctantly announced that they needed to head home. Lucas had school the next day, and she had an early shift at the restaurant. "Can we do this again?" Sharon asked, as they waited for Robert to bring the car around. "Please? I want to show Lucas my collection of books next time." "If your dad says it's okay," Esther replied carefully. Craig met her eyes over the children's heads. "I'd like that very much." In the car ride back to Brooklyn, Lucas was uncharacteristically quiet. Esther wondered if he was feeling the same thing she was, a sense of stepping back into their smaller, simpler world, after glimpsing something entirely different. "Mom?" Lucas said finally as they climbed the stairs to their apartment. "Yes, baby?" "Mr. Craig is really nice, and Sharon is the best friend I've ever had. I'm glad you had fun today. Do you think they like us?" The question broke Esther's heart a little. "Of course they like us, Lucas. Why would you ask that?" "Because their house is so fancy, and ours is..." He gestured around their tiny landing. "Ours is different." Esther knelt down to his eye level, taking his hands in hers. "Lucas, listen to me. Our home is full of love, and that's what matters most. Mr. Craig and Sharon have a beautiful apartment, but that doesn't make them better than us, and it doesn't make us less than them. We're all just people, okay?" Lucas nodded solemnly. "Okay, Mom." But as she tucked him into bed that night, Esther couldn't shake her own version of the same worry. She and Craig came from completely different worlds. What could a struggling single mother from Brooklyn possibly have to offer a millionaire CEO from Manhattan's Upper East Side? Meanwhile, across the city, Craig was asking himself a similar question. After putting Sharon to bed, she'd insisted on calling Esther to say goodnight, which had melted both adults' hearts. He found himself pacing his apartment, replaying every moment of the afternoon. When was the last time he'd laughed so freely? When had he last felt so normal? For 5 hours he hadn't been Craig Burton, CEO. He'd been Craig Burton, father, playing silly games on his daughter's bedroom floor and feeling more alive than he had in years. And Esther. There was something about her that drew him in. Her gentleness with the children, her quick wit, the way she'd looked at his expensive apartment and somehow seen not what it was, but what it could be. She treated him like a regular person, not a business opportunity or a trophy to be won, but what could he offer her? His world was all board meetings and charity galas, private schools and country clubs. Her world was real, grounded, full of the kind of authentic relationships he'd forgotten existed. Still, he found himself reaching for his phone. "Hello." Esther's voice was soft, slightly breathless. "Hi, it's Craig. I hope I'm not calling too late." "No, it's fine. I was just finishing the dishes. How's Sharon?" "Asleep, finally. She made me promise to ask if you and Lucas could come to the Natural History Museum with us next Saturday." Esther smiled into the phone. "She's persistent. It's one of her best qualities. What do you think?" "I think Lucas would love that. He's obsessed with dinosaurs right now." "Perfect. The museum has an incredible paleontology exhibit." They chatted for another 20 minutes about the children, the weather, inconsequential things that somehow felt deeply important. When they finally said goodnight, both were smiling. The following Saturday at the Natural History Museum was even better than the park. Lucas was in absolute heaven among the dinosaur skeletons, peppering the museum guides with questions and dragging Sharon from exhibit to exhibit with infectious enthusiasm. "Did you know that Tyrannosaurus Rex had teeth as big as bananas?" he announced to anyone within earshot. "That's gross," Sharon declared, but she was grinning. Craig and Esther followed behind, amused by the children's energy and gradually falling into easy conversation. "He's really smart," Craig observed, watching Lucas explain the difference between carnivores and herbivores to Sharon. "Have you thought about private school? There are some excellent programs in the city." Esther's expression closed slightly. "We're happy with his public school." Craig immediately realized his mistake. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply. I just meant that he has such a curious mind." "He does," Esther agreed, her tone warming again. "He reads everything he can get his hands on. The librarian at our branch knows him by name. Sharon loves to read too. Maybe they could share book recommendations." "I'd like that." They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the museum, and by the time they parted ways, both children were already planning their next adventure together. Over the following weeks, the foursome began meeting regularly. Sometimes it was planned activities: the zoo, a children's theater performance, ice skating at Rockefeller Center. Other times, it was more spontaneous. Craig would call on a Sunday morning and suggest a walk through Central Park, or Esther would text asking if Sharon wanted to join them for pizza at their favorite Brooklyn spot. With each meeting, the adults grew more comfortable with each other. Craig learned that Esther had dreamed of being a teacher before circumstances forced her to drop out of college. Esther discovered that Craig had wanted to be an architect before inheriting his father's tech company. They talked about books, movies, their hopes for their children, their fears about raising kids alone. Most importantly, they watched their children bloom in each other's company. Lucas became more confident and outgoing. Sharon became more grounded and less anxious. The difference in their economic circumstances became irrelevant in the face of genuine friendship. It was during their fifth or sixth outing, a quiet afternoon at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, that something shifted. The children were exploring a hedge maze while Craig and Esther sat on a bench nearby, enjoying the late afternoon sun. They'd been talking about Lucas's upcoming school play when the conversation naturally lulled into comfortable silence. "I never thought I'd feel normal again," Craig said quietly, not looking at her. "What do you mean?" "After Rebecca died, I threw myself into work. It was easier than dealing with the grief, with being alone, with raising Sharon without her mother. For 3 years, I've been going through the motions: business meetings, charity events, parent-teacher conferences. I felt like I was watching my life happen to someone else." Esther turned to study his profile, seeing the pain he usually kept hidden behind his composed exterior. "And now?" she asked gently. Craig looked at her then, his dark eyes intense. "Now I feel like I'm finally living again. These afternoons with you and Lucas." Sharon laughs like she used to when she was little. I laugh. I remember what it feels like to just be happy. Esther's heart raced. "Craig, I know this is complicated," he continued, his voice urgent now. "I know we come from different worlds, and I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I can't pretend anymore that this is just about the kids." Before Esther could respond, Lucas and Sharon came bursting out of the maze, faces flushed with triumph. "We solved it," Sharon announced. Lucas knew the secret. "What secret?" Craig asked, his voice remarkably steady despite the moment that had just passed between him and Esther. "You always turn left at every corner," Lucas explained proudly. "It works every time." The moment was gone, but the feeling lingered. As they walked back toward the garden entrance, Craig's hand brushed against Esther's, and this time, neither pulled away. That night, after Lucas was asleep, Esther found herself staring at the ceiling, replaying Craig's words over and over. She couldn't deny her feelings anymore. Somewhere between that first desperate night in the hospital and today's quiet confession, she had fallen for this kind, devoted father who had somehow seen past her circumstances to the woman beneath. But what kind of future could they possibly have? She was a waitress living paycheck to paycheck. He was a CEO worth millions. The fairy tale only worked in movies. Her phone buzzed with a text message. I meant what I said today. I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable. Craig. She stared at the message for a long time before typing back. You didn't. I'm just scared. Of what? Of wanting something I can't have. What if you could have it? What if none of the other stuff mattered? Esther closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine it for just a moment. Waking up in Craig's arms. Sharon calling her mom. Lucas having a father figure who could throw a baseball and help with homework. A real family, complete and whole. I don't know how to want things like that, she typed finally. I've spent so many years just trying to survive. Then maybe it's time to start living. They texted until nearly midnight, sharing hopes and fears they'd never voiced aloud. By the time they said goodnight, something fundamental had changed between them. The next few weeks took on a different quality. The group outings continued, but now there were lingering looks, hands that found reasons to touch, conversations that carried deeper meaning. The children, oblivious to the undercurrents, continued to grow closer, often conspiring to get their respective parents to spend more time together. It was Sharon who engineered their first real date, though she didn't know it at the time. Daddy, she announced over breakfast one morning. Lucas invited me to his school play on Thursday night. Can we go? Craig paused in reading his morning emails. His school play? Uh-huh. He's going to be a tree in the forest and he wants me to see him. Esther said she could pick me up from school and take me with her and you could meet us there. Craig suspected this was more orchestrated than Sharon was letting on, but he found himself agreeing anyway. The thought of seeing Esther in her element, at her son's school, surrounded by her community, appealed to him more than he cared to admit. The play was held in the gymnasium of PS 234, a far cry from the private school productions Craig usually attended. The costumes were clearly homemade, the sets painted by parent volunteers, and the sound system crackled occasionally. But there was something magical about it. The pure joy on the children's faces, the proud parents crowding into folding chairs, the sense of community that permeated everything. Lucas made a very serious tree, standing perfectly still during the woodland scene while other children danced around him as forest animals. When he finally had his moment to speak, one line about protecting the forest, his voice rang out clear and strong, and Sharon clapped enthusiastically from the front row. After the performance, Craig found himself surrounded by other parents eager to meet Sharon's father. They were kind, welcoming people who treated him with curiosity rather than the usual deference or suspicion his wealth typically inspired. Several mothers complimented him on Sharon's politeness and asked about her school, while fathers discussed Little League tryouts and weekend soccer games as if he were any other dad. Your daughter is delightful, Mrs. Patterson, the school principal, told him as the evening wound down. Lucas talks about her constantly. Esther mentioned you might be interested in our reading volunteer program. Craig glanced at Esther, who was helping Lucas out of his tree costume across the room. She did? We're always looking for people to read with the first and second graders. It doesn't require any special training, just patience and enthusiasm. Yes, I think I'd like that very much. As they walked to Craig's car afterward, he'd insisted on driving them all home. Sharon skipped between the adults while Lucas regaled them with behind-the-scenes stories from the play. Mrs. Martinez forgot her lines and just made stuff up, he giggled. She was supposed to say the forest needs our protection, but instead she said the trees like being green. That's called improvisation, Craig said with a smile. All the best actors know how to do it. Really? So Mrs. Martinez is a good actor? The best. When they reached Esther's building, Craig walked them to the door despite her protests that it wasn't necessary. As Esther fished for her keys, the children hugged goodbye with promises to talk on the phone the next day. Thank you for coming tonight, Esther said softly as Lucas ran ahead up the stairs. It meant a lot to him, to both of us. Thank you for including us. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed a school event so much. They stood in the small foyer, neither wanting the evening to end. Craig reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind Esther's ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Esther. he said quietly. Would you have dinner with me? Just us? Her breath caught. Craig, I know it's complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this might be a bad idea. But I need to know if what I'm feeling is real. If you feel it too. Esther looked up into his eyes, seeing vulnerability there that matched her own. Yes, she whispered. I feel it too. Saturday night? I'll pick you up at 7? Okay. Craig leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. Sweet dreams, Esther. Saturday night arrived with unseasonable warmth for November. Esther had spent the day in a state of nervous excitement, changing outfits 3 times before settling on a simple black dress she'd found at a consignment shop. Elegant, but not trying too hard. Mrs. Rodriguez had eagerly agreed to watch Lucas for the evening, and both women had spent considerable time assuring him that this was just dinner with a friend, and definitely not a date, despite his knowing smirks. When Craig arrived at 7 sharp, looking devastatingly handsome in a dark suit with no tie, Esther felt her knees go weak. You look beautiful, he said simply, offering her a single white rose. Thank you. She buried her face in the flower, using the moment to compose herself. You didn't have to. I wanted to. The restaurant he'd chosen surprised her. Instead of one of Manhattan's famous high-end establishments, he'd made reservations at a small Italian place in Little Italy that felt intimate and cozy rather than imposing. How did you find this place? She asked as they were seated at a corner table lit by candlelight. Sharon's pediatrician recommended it. She said it was where she took her husband for their anniversary every year because the food was incredible and it felt like being invited into someone's home. Esther smiled. She was right. Over wine and perfectly prepared ossobuco, they talked about everything and nothing. Craig told her about his childhood, growing up as the heir to a tech empire but always feeling more at home in his mother's garden than his father's boardroom. Esther shared stories about her own childhood, raised by loving but strict grandparents after her parents died in a car accident when she was 16. Is that why you dropped out of college? Craig asked gently. Esther nodded. I was 18, pregnant and alone. My boyfriend disappeared the minute he found out about the baby. I had enough money saved for 1 semester, maybe 2 if I worked nights. But when Lucas was born, she smiled softly. All my dreams shifted. Instead of wanting to teach other people's children, I just wanted to be the best mother I could be to him. Do you ever regret it? Never. Lucas is the best thing that ever happened to me, but sometimes I wonder what my life might have looked like if I'd had different choices. Craig reached across the table and took her hand. What would you do now, if you could do anything? I used to dream about opening a small bookshop, Esther admitted. Somewhere children could come for story time, where parents could find books about dealing with difficult topics, where people could just connect over literature. But that's impossible now. Why impossible? Craig, I can barely afford groceries some weeks, business loans, startup costs, inventory. It's not realistic. What if it could be? Esther pulled her hand back gently. Please don't. Don't offer to solve my problems with your money. That's not what I want from you. What do you want from me? The question hung in the air between them. Esther looked at this man who had somehow become so important to her in such a short time. His kind eyes, his gentle hands, the way he listened to her like every word mattered. I want you to see me, she said finally. Not as a project to fix or a charity case to help, just me. I do see you, Craig said softly. I see a woman who works 2 jobs without complaining to give her son every opportunity. I see someone who stopped to help a stranger's child when she had every reason to keep walking. I see the mother who makes Lucas feel like the luckiest kid in the world, even though she's raising him alone. I see the woman who made my daughter laugh again, who made me remember what it feels like to be happy. Tears pricked Esther's eyes. Craig, I'm falling in love with you, Esther. Not because I want to rescue you. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because you're the strongest, kindest, most beautiful person I've ever met. The words hung between them, terrifying and wonderful. Esther felt her heart racing, her carefully constructed walls crumbling. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered, and it scares me to death. Craig stood up from his chair and moved to her side of the table, kneeling beside her chair. Why does it scare you? Because I don't know how this works. I don't know how to be with someone like you. I don't know how to fit into your world. Then don't fit into my world, Craig said, taking her hands in his. Create a new world with me. One where the only thing that matters is how we feel about each other and how happy we can make our children. He leaned forward and kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. When they broke apart, Esther was crying. Okay, she whispered. Let's try. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of new experiences and deeper emotions. Craig and Esther began officially dating, though they were careful to take things slowly for the children's sake. Family outings became more frequent and more natural. Sharon started calling Esther by her first name instead of Lucas's mom, and Lucas began asking Craig's opinion on everything from homework problems to what kind of sneakers were coolest. The first time Craig stayed for dinner at Esther's apartment, she was terrified. Her tiny kitchen, mismatched dishes, and simple meal of spaghetti and meatballs seemed inadequate for someone accustomed to five-star restaurants. But Craig praised her cooking effusively, helped with dishes despite her protests, and seemed genuinely comfortable squeezed around her small table with the kids. This is perfect, he told her as they tucked the children into Lucas's bed for a sleepover. This is what I meant about creating our own world. The first time Esther spent the night at Craig's penthouse, she felt overwhelmed by the luxury, but tried to hide her discomfort. She woke up to find Craig already dressed for work, making coffee in his state-of-the-art kitchen. I'm sorry, he said, kissing her good morning. Emergency meeting with the board. But there's fresh orange juice in the refrigerator, and Mrs. Patterson will be here at 8 to help with the kids' breakfast and get them ready for school. Mrs. Patterson, my housekeeper. Don't worry, she's wonderful with Sharon. She's practically family. After he left, Esther found herself alone in the cavernous apartment, feeling more out of place than ever. When Mrs. Patterson arrived, a kindly woman in her 60s who clearly adored Sharon, Esther felt like an intruder in someone else's life. You must be Miss Esther, Mrs. Patterson said warmly. Sharon has told me so much about you. She's absolutely smitten. She's a wonderful little girl. She is indeed, and you've made such a difference in her life. Mr. Burton too, if you don't mind my saying. I haven't seen him this happy since before Mrs. Burton passed. Esther helped get the children ready for school, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing a role she wasn't qualified for. When Craig returned that evening, he found her unusually quiet. Everything okay? He asked as they watched the kids play in Sharon's room. I don't know how to do this, Esther admitted. Your housekeeper knows more about Sharon's routine than I do. Your apartment is bigger than my whole building. I feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. Craig took her hands. You're not pretending to be anyone. You're just being you. And that's all I want. But what if it's not enough? What if your friends don't accept me? What if Sharon's school thinks I'm not good enough? What if... Craig silenced her with a kiss. What if you stopped worrying about everyone else and just focused on us? It was easier said than done, but Esther tried. She met Craig's business associates at a company Christmas party and found them surprisingly normal. She attended Sharon's school holiday concert and discovered that the other parents cared more about their children's happiness than Craig's bank account. Most importantly, she watched Lucas and Sharon grow closer every day, becoming the siblings neither had ever had. They did homework together, shared inside jokes, and defended each other with fierce loyalty. When Lucas came down with a bad cold, Sharon insisted on making him get well cards every day until he felt better. When Sharon had nightmares about her mother, Lucas would climb into her bed and tell her stories until she fell back asleep. By February, they were spending most nights together as a family, alternating between Craig's penthouse and Esther's apartment. The arrangement worked surprisingly well. The kids loved having two homes. Craig genuinely enjoyed the simplicity of Brooklyn life, and Esther gradually became more comfortable with luxury. Then, just as everything seemed to be settling into a perfect rhythm, life threw them a curveball. It started with Lucas complaining of tiredness. At first, Esther attributed it to the busy schedule they'd been keeping. Between school, playdates, and family activities, the kids had been going nonstop for months. But when the fatigue persisted and was accompanied by frequent headaches and a diminished appetite, she began to worry. The pediatrician at the community clinic ran basic blood tests and found nothing conclusive. "Probably just a virus," Dr. Williams assured her. "Keep him hydrated and make sure he gets plenty of rest." But Lucas didn't improve. If anything, he seemed to be getting worse. He started falling asleep in class, barely picked at his favorite foods, and complained that his head hurt all the time. The dark circles under his eyes deepened, and his usual energy disappeared entirely. Esther tried not to panic, but Mother's intuition told her something was seriously wrong. When Lucas fainted during recess at school, she knew she couldn't wait any longer. "I want to take him to a specialist," she told Craig over the phone as she sat in the school nurse's office, stroking Lucas's hair while he slept on the small cot. "Of course. I'll call my pediatrician right now and get you an appointment today." "Craig, I can't afford—" Don't even think about money right now. Lucas needs to be seen by the best doctors available, and we'll figure everything else out later." Dr. Sarah Chen was everything Craig had promised: thorough, compassionate, and highly regarded in her field. She spent over an hour examining Lucas, asking detailed questions about his symptoms and medical history. When she ordered a comprehensive panel of blood tests and an MRI, Esther's heart sank. "What do you think it might be?" she asked quietly while Lucas was having his blood drawn in the next room. "I don't want to speculate until we have results," Dr. Chen said carefully. "But I'm glad you brought him in when you did. Sometimes persistent fatigue and headaches in children can indicate conditions that need immediate attention." The wait for results was agonizing. Craig took time off work to be with them, and Sharon stayed with Mrs. Patterson so the adults could focus entirely on Lucas. For 3 days, they haunted the hospital corridors, holding hands and trying to stay positive while inside they were both terrified. When Dr. Chen called them into her office on the 4th day, her expression was serious but not hopeless. "Lucas has a rare condition called juvenile dermatomyositis," she explained. "It's an autoimmune disorder that affects the muscles and skin. The good news is that it's treatable. The challenging news is that treatment is intensive, expensive, and needs to start immediately." Esther felt the room spin around her. "How expensive?" "The initial treatment protocol will cost approximately $150,000 over the next 6 months. That includes medications, regular hospital stays for infusions, physical therapy, and frequent monitoring. After that, he'll need ongoing treatment that could cost another $50,000 per year for several years." Esther's face went white. Even with her limited health insurance, the out-of-pocket costs would be astronomical. Money she didn't have, couldn't borrow, and had no way to earn. "What happens if he doesn't get treatment?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "The disease will progress. He'll continue to weaken, and eventually his organs could be affected. Without treatment, juvenile dermatomyositis can be life-threatening." Craig immediately spoke up. "What do we need to do to start treatment today?" "Craig, no," Esther said firmly. "We need to discuss this privately." But Dr. Chen was already pulling up treatment protocols on her computer. "If you're ready to begin, we can admit Lucas this afternoon and start the first round of immunosuppressants. The sooner we begin, the better his long-term prognosis." "Do it," Craig said without hesitation. "Craig, stop." Esther's voice was sharp with panic and pride. "I need to speak with you outside, now." In the hallway, Esther turned on Craig with tears streaming down her face. "You can't just decide to pay for my son's medical treatment." "Why not?" Because... She struggled to find words for the complex emotions churning inside her. "Because if you pay for this, I'll never be able to repay you. I'll be in debt to you for the rest of my life." "I don't want you to repay me," Craig said gently. "I love Lucas like he's my own son. If Sharon needed this treatment, wouldn't you want me to do everything possible to save her? That's different." "How?" "Because you're not his father. We're not married. We're not even engaged. What if things don't work out between us? What if you decide 6 months from now that this is all too complicated? Craig took her hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Esther, listen to me very carefully. I am not going anywhere. I love you, I love Lucas, and I love the family we're building together. This isn't about money or debt or obligation. This is about doing everything in my power to save the life of a little boy who calls me almost dad and has become one of the most important people in my world. But what if Lucas dies because we're standing in a hospital hallway arguing about pride and money instead of getting him the treatment he needs? The words hit Esther like a physical blow. She looked through the glass doors of Dr. Chen's office where Lucas was sitting in a chair that dwarfed his small frame, looking pale and tired and so very young. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. I'm scared too. But we're going to get through this together. Esther closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision crushing down on her. Everything in her rebelled against accepting such a massive gift from Craig, but everything in her heart as a mother demanded she do whatever it took to save her son. Okay, she said finally. But I want to be involved in every decision. This is still my child. Of course. We'll face all of it together. Lucas's treatment began that afternoon. The first few weeks were brutal. Long days at the hospital, powerful medications that made him nauseous and weak, endless blood tests, and monitoring. Esther took a leave of absence from both jobs, and Craig rearranged his entire schedule to be present for every appointment, every procedure, every difficult moment. Sharon struggled with the sudden upheaval in their family routine. She didn't fully understand what was happening to Lucas, only that everyone was scared and sad and spending all their time at the hospital. Mrs. Patterson did her best to maintain normalcy, but Sharon began acting out, throwing tantrums and refusing to sleep in her own bed. She thinks we're abandoning her, Craig realized after a particularly difficult evening where Sharon had sobbed for 2 hours because Esther couldn't read her bedtime story. Maybe I should stay with her tonight, Esther suggested, though the thought of leaving Lucas at the hospital made her stomach clench. No, we need to bring her with us more often. She needs to understand that Lucas being sick doesn't mean we love her any less. So Sharon began spending afternoons at the hospital, doing homework in Lucas's room while he slept, or playing quiet games when he was awake enough to participate. Gradually, she began to understand that this wasn't about her, and her natural protective instincts toward her almost brother emerged. When I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor, she announced one day while coloring a get well card for Lucas, and I'm going to cure all the kids so they don't have to be sick anymore. Slowly, gradually, Lucas began to respond to treatment. His energy levels improved slightly, his appetite returned, and the worst of his symptoms began to ease. After 6 weeks, Dr. Chen was cautiously optimistic. He's responding better than I hoped, she told them during a follow-up appointment. If this progress continues, we might be able to transition to outpatient treatment sooner than expected. 3 months into treatment, Lucas was well enough to return to school part-time. He was still thin and tired easily, but his smile was back, and he'd regained enough strength to play gentle games with Sharon. Look, Mom, he called from the playground during one of their hospital visits, hanging upside down from the monkey bars for exactly 3 seconds before dropping to the ground with a grin. I'm getting strong again, Esther cried, watching him, overwhelmed with gratitude and love and the slowly dawning realization that her son was going to be okay. That evening, as they sat in Lucas's hospital room waiting for his final infusion of the day, Craig turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I have something to ask you, he said quietly, glancing at the children, who were engrossed in a movie on the tablet. What is it? Craig reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Esther's breath caught. I know this isn't the most romantic setting, he said, dropping to one knee beside her chair. But this room, this struggle, this experience of almost losing someone we love, it's shown me something important. Craig, Esther whispered, aware that Lucas and Sharon had noticed what was happening and were now watching with wide eyes. It's shown me that life is precious and unpredictable, and when you find someone you want to spend it with, you shouldn't wait for the perfect moment. You should create the moment. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant solitaire diamond ring. Esther Norbert, will you marry me? Will you let me be Lucas's father and Sharon's stepmother officially? Will you build a real family with me, one where we face everything together? Sickness and health, wealth and poverty, all of it? Esther looked at this man who had saved her son's life without hesitation, who had held her while she cried, who had rearranged his entire world to accommodate hers. She looked at Sharon, bouncing excitedly in her chair, and at Lucas, grinning despite his exhaustion. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I'll marry you." Craig slipped the ring onto her finger as both children cheered. When he kissed her, it tasted like tears and joy and the promise of forever. "Are you going to be my real mom now?" Sharon asked, climbing onto Esther's lap. "If you want me to be." "I do. I really, really do." "And Craig," Lucas said seriously, "are you going to be my real dad?" "If that's what you want, buddy, it is. But does this mean I have to call you Dad instead of Craig?" Craig laughed. "You can call me whatever feels right to you." Lucas considered this gravely. I think I'd like to call you Dad." 6 months later, Lucas received a clean bill of health from Dr. Chen. The disease was in complete remission, and while he would need ongoing monitoring, his prognosis was excellent. 1 year later, Craig and Esther were married in a small ceremony in Central Park, surrounded by friends and family. Lucas served as ring bearer, and Sharon was the flower girl. Mrs. Rodriguez cried through the entire ceremony, and even Mrs. Patterson was seen dabbing at her eyes. The reception was held at a small restaurant in Brooklyn, not the fancy Manhattan venue Craig could have afforded, but the place where Esther felt most comfortable, surrounded by people who had known and loved her long before she became the fiancée of a CEO. During their first dance, Craig whispered in Esther's ear, "Any regrets?" Esther looked around at their wedding guests, Lucas and Sharon dancing with reckless abandon, Mrs. Rodriguez arguing politics with Craig's business partner, her former co-workers from the restaurant laughing with Craig's college friends. "None," she said firmly. "This is perfect." 2 years after that, they welcomed a daughter together, Emma, with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. Lucas and Sharon, now 9 and 7 respectively, were devoted big siblings who fought over who got to help with bottles and diaper changes. The family split their time between Craig's Manhattan penthouse and a house they bought together in Brooklyn, close enough to Lucas's school and Esther's friends, but large enough for their growing family. Esther had finally opened her bookstore, a cozy little shop that hosted story times and writing workshops and had become a gathering place for neighborhood families. "You know what the best part is?" Craig said one evening, as they watched their 3 children build a blanket fort in the living room of their Brooklyn home. "What's that?" Esther asked, settling against his shoulder on the couch. "None of this was planned. We didn't meet at a charity gala or through mutual friends. We met because Sharon got lost and scared, and you were exactly where you needed to be to find her. You think it was fate?" "I think," Craig said, kissing the top of her head, "that sometimes the universe conspires to bring people together exactly when they need each other most." In the blanket fort, Lucas was reading a story to his sisters, his voice strong and healthy. Sharon was adding her own dramatic interpretations to the tale, and baby Emma was gurgling happily in her bouncy seat. Esther smiled, thinking about that cold October night that had changed everything. She'd been walking home from another exhausting day, worried about bills and the future and whether she was giving Lucas enough. She'd had no idea that stopping to help one lost little girl would lead to finding the family she'd never dared to dream of. "I love you," she whispered to Craig. "I love you too. All of you. Our whole beautiful, chaotic, perfect family." And as the children's laughter filled their home, Esther knew that sometimes the most unexpected detours lead to exactly where you're meant to be. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.